Gentlemen, welcome. I'm finally going to give you my settings. I'm sorry this has taken so long. I actually used to have a video on this that I took down since it felt like it got outdated pretty quickly. So my settings for War Thunder Sim involve using a HOTAS. It involves using a PlayStation controller, since I am in fact on PlayStation. It requires using a freaking keyboard, which is over here. I use this to chat and to do, I use this to chat and to do like manual engine controls and such. And of course, the centerpiece of every good War Thunder Sim console setup, the Air Mouse, the little $6 to $10 controller here that lets you get makeshift head tracking. I'll be showing you how to set up all of these things and what I use for different settings, depending on different aircraft, things like props, things like jets. My specific setups for aircraft like 109s, the Typhoon, things like the Gripen. I know this isn't my normal video, and I'm sorry if this is very boring. We'll return to normal posting right after this video. So just for reference, when I'm flying, I usually keep the keyboard in my lap. I used to keep it up top, but while now I'm recording, it gets very annoying. Of course, the T-Flight HOTAS is right here, and the throttle is over here. Now, I also have the T-Flight HOTAS rudder pedals, no free content for you today, and I keep my controller over here when I can easily touch the buttons that I need to. This is the first time you guys have ever seen my recording setup. It's ratchet as fuck. If you don't believe me, I mean, come on, this is a joke. But hey, it works. And I'm going to show you how. So first things first, take any aircraft you'd want into a test flight. We're going to do that right here. Make sure all of your devices are connected to whatever console or PC that you'd like to use. And very importantly, if you are going to be using this Air Mouse, this setup right now is the default when you get into a sim test flight. It is simplified controls with relative control in here. Now, if we unpause and actually see what this looks like, I'm not going to touch any control surfaces. I'm just going to hit the button on the top of my joystick to activate my head look. So this is what it's going to do. Your head is going to be tethered to this mouse aim right here. Watch this shit. I put the throttle up to like 70 or 80%, hands in the air. My head tracking is on. Look, it's automatically going to where the Air Mouse is following my head. So it's basically acting as the mouse aim control, and it's obviously very difficult. Now, if you don't realize this is happening and you're just trying to fly, you're going to be wondering why everything is so freaking touchy, okay? It's extremely disorienting. So the first thing you want to do if you're using this setup is go to Controls, Full Reel, and even more importantly, take this relative control and go to None. None. That should do you a lot of favors. You're now going to go to Camera Control, go down to View in Battle, X-axis and Y-axis. Mind you, this is not me censoring anything. I don't know why this does this. It completely breaks. So to the guy who lost his shit in my comment section that I was gatekeeping my settings like a psychopath, this just happens, all right? So I have the enable access set to this button on the controller. This little nipple, when I press it, allows me to turn just like that, right? So I can move this stick around, do that. And then when I release, it lets go. I also have this binded so that way when I press this nipple to the right side, it zooms in. This way, I can hold it, turn, and zoom at the exact same time, and then release all at the same. I also have head movement up, down, binded to this. So when I pull this backwards, just like that, my head goes up in the cockpit and lets me get some better deflection shooting. And the reset, if you couldn't already tell, is to that left side. I think the view controls are one of the first things that you should set up, even before you get to the actual controls of the plane. It's going to make everything a lot more accessible when you actually go to test it out. Now, one thing to note with this Air Mouse is that after about 45 seconds, it's going to shut off on you if you have not put that nipple up, meaning you haven't activated it. You need to activate the Air Mouse every 45 seconds to a minute, or else it will turn off on you. If it does turn off on you, reach up, hit any button on top, and it will turn right back on. Now, this should never be an issue because you should always be moving your head around and at least checking your 6 o'clock, checking your 9 o'clock, checking your 3 o'clock, all of that, checking your high, checking your low. This should never run out on you. The only issue that you might have is in a dogfight. If you hold it for more than 45 seconds, it will also shut off on you. I find that way more annoying, but it's something you have to deal with if you want head tracking on a console. And if you're wondering how I don't have to strain all the way around to see things, I go to View Battle. I'm going to turn this off so it's not moving my mouse all around. I have the dead zone set to 0.25, the multiplier to 1.15. This is very important, as well as the View in Battle for this set a little bit differently. The multiplier is only to 1. In my view controls, I also have zoom camera, which is those nipple activations that I was telling you about. Mouse look activation as that up button. The fixed gun direction in mouse view is a yes. Mouse and touchpad, all of these sensitivities are to these ones specifically. Now to the aircraft controls. This is going to be my prop setup. So we're going to be going down this. Remember, be in full reel controls with your controls mode set to none. Throttle axis, of course, it's going to be this on your throttle. Pretty basic. I actually didn't adjust anything for my specific HOTUS, except I inverted the axis because for whatever reason they have it backwards. So if I don't invert this and I pull back, it increases the throttle, and I think that's dumb. So invert the axis, that's all you got to do. I have hold throttle for WEP turned off. Roll axis, very similar. Roll, right and left. Pitch, you know how this works. Pull it back, push it forward, pitch. No multipliers or anything, and yaw axis can get a bit complicated, but I use the rudder pedals down there. Now there's a few options for you with this specific HOTUS setup. There is an option if you just take a little Phillips head screwdriver and put it right here. This will twist on you, and you can use that as your yaw setup to control your rudder. There's also these things on the back, which I used for 2 years. It's not very controllable. There's no resistance on these at all. It's yeah, I'm not actually sure what the idea with these is, but it is possible. Although I would highly recommend getting the rudder pedals if you can. Now I've gone over the specifics of sensitivities in a short video, which I'll link up here, but for the sensitivities now, I have them at 100% for everything. I flew for multiple years with everything at 1%. Here are the differences. They are pretty noticeable. If you're flying specific aircraft like a Spitfire, first off, that aircraft is not noob friendly, but many aircraft have an issue where the nose will wobble around on you, or you're just getting new, you're kind of freaking out every time you get on somebody's 6 o'clock. So when you have the sensitivities turned down, the aircraft isn't really gonna respond very quickly to your jerked movements, and it's gonna let you fly straighter and with more control. The only issue is that when you do get into a dogfight, your controls aren't going to be very responsive and snappy if you'd like them to be. You sort of have to get good at catching things like wing stalls before you pump it up to 100%, or you're going to end up flat spinning and stuff a lot, which is totally possible and very doable. It's just going to take a lot of practice. So don't get discouraged. Don't get too frustrated with it. Continuing down the list, force feedback. I don't have any on this HOTUS, so I leave it at that 50%. Flaps down right here. Flaps up right here. Toggle air brake is this button on the back side at the very top. You see there's 2 buttons back here. It's the top one. I don't have any button for thrust reversal for the props. And then toggle gear is this button on the back side. Now, a very good plus of these rudder pedals is that they have individual braking for the left wheel and right wheel when your gear are down and on the ground, which helps with things like taxiing, turning around, just scaring your teammates. It's very fun. And with these rudder pedals, you have the most control over it because as you can see, when I slowly apply, that axis gets slowly detected. And same thing with the right side. So that's for the left. Now, if I go over to the right brake, it does exactly the same thing very gently. This helps you land and brake aircraft that are very sensitive with braking. Things like the Chaika come to mind. This next bit is fairly subjective, but for my lower caliber guns, I have it set to this button here in the back, and for higher caliber, I use this button right here. Additional guns, things like gun pods, I also have set to this button just for simplification. Things like the BF-110 can get very frustrating with having 3 buttons to fire your guns, so I just keep them the same, especially if they're the same caliber. I generally ignore all of these. I find them pretty redundant. Open bomb bay door I have set to D, so D. Bomb drop I have set to L3 over here, and there's a little tab on this side, which I use to fire the rockets. I can generally ignore these because I don't use the Fritz X, and I only use this setup for props, so the weapon lock's not really applicable. But I do switch my secondary weapons if I want to choose specific bombs, and I do that by selecting the circle button right here. In addition to using the R3 button for rockets, I also use it to switch to my Schragamusi cannons, if I have that option for the aircraft. Gunner control is pretty subjective. A lot of people have mouses that help them aim. Mine is pretty bad. I'm not the best at using gunners because I use this little controller thing right here. I mean, here's what my axes look like. These are all my settings. If your air mouse is activated and you switch to a gunner view, you can actually use your head to aim, which is why it's so difficult to hit shots. Tracking camera isn't really applicable in sim. And then the zoom axis, we go back to the zoom being the right on the nipple, and I already showed you guys these settings right here with the up, down, and the reset. Now the miscellaneous, my aerobatic smoke is set to P, open cockpit is to O, cockpit lighting's to L, and the cockpit sight on and off is for the V. We can ignore all this and we can go to trimming. And for trimming, we can look at the keyboard right here, and I use all of these buttons in this general area to do so. So elevator, up, down, increase percentage on rudder, decrease percentage on rudder, into the negatives as well. I use control for increase percentage, and I use this for negative percentage for my ailerons, as well as using the backslash button over here to reset all of the trimming. Apologies if this is a little crusty dusty. And here are the axes that I use within all of this. Relative control, aileron, 40%, and this is all set up for my specific keyboard that I use. So to switch into manual engine controls, I do spacebar. Toggle engine is of course on I for ignition. My mixture controls are over here. And my prop pitch is actually binded to the rocker on the back side. That is for a specific reason that we'll get into a little bit later. I almost always use the toggle auto prop pitch. I'm not a huge guy when it comes to using manual engine controls. If I can, I leave everything on automatic and I just touch the radiator controls. I know it's not always realistic when we talk about aircraft like the Yaks and such, but I mean, it's a semi-sim, isn't it? Radiator controls are over here, as well as the oil radiator controls. Toggle radiator, I have at R. Turbocharger controls are bracket and equals over on this side. Apostrophe and semicolon, all for the supercharger controls. Now, prop feathering is another one that I use fairly often when I switch into manual engine controls. This will straighten up your props, that way it causes less drag when your engine is completely dead, allowing you to glide significantly longer than if you had that additional drag from your prop having turned into the air. I'd use the numbers up at the top to control all of my engines. Let's say I'm flying a 2-engine bomber and engine 1 is on fire. I'll select engine 1, pull the throttle all the way back and turn the ignition off, and then I will select 2, turn off once, that way my controls don't touch that, and I'll just fly on engine 2. Same thing with it if it's a 4-engine bomber or something like a 6-engine bomber if you're insane. Moving on to common controls, I'm actually going to use my controller quite a bit for this one. So tactical map I have for the O, stats if you just want to pull up the leaderboard, for the big touchpad here in the middle. On the keyboard, and activate chat is set to C. And to switch chat mode, I have it to the left alt button right under the C. Nice and easy. Interface, this hide HUD is specific for content creation, so it actually is the same button as I have toggled for my switch secondary weapons. So if I'm flying an aircraft where I want to switch my secondary weapons, I'll just turn this off. It's not that big of a deal. Decal rotation, if you really care about that, I mean, I think we move on to the view controls, which I really already showed you guys. The voice messages, thank you, cover me, negative, sorry, all of the, I mean, there's a lot more that you can choose from. And that is the basics of all of my settings right there. As you can see, I have a lot of presets when it comes to all of my settings. Many of these are just for content creation, whether it's the immersion, replay camera, sim tanks. You can ignore all of those right here. Some of these are recommendations for my squad that I've tried out, as well as specific aircraft, things like the F-89D, a Jets one, a 109's, Gripper, of course, and the Typhoon. For now, let's just go into the jet setup and see what the difference is. So everything down to here is going to be the same. And the first difference is on the drag chute is now activated to D. My large caliber guns as well as additional guns are now onto R1, which is the trigger on the back side of my HOTUS, not L1 up here at the top. I have a jettison secondary weapons here at the J, and the open bomb bay door also on D. Since I can't open a bomb bay door on the ground and I can't open drag chute in the air, I don't see a reason where those two would ever conflict, so I have D binded to two different things. Drop bomb is kept at L3 as well as the rockets being kept on R3. Now where I start to use L1 now, which is where my thumb sits when I'm on the joystick, I use that for missiles now. You can ignore the drop guided bomb setting right here. I just don't use this. It's literally binded to this on the controller. It is completely obsolete in my mind. I will never be dropping guided bombs. Drop additional fuel tanks, also set to D. I know everything seems like it's set to D on the keyboard, but if I'm carrying additional fuel tanks, I probably don't have a bomb bay, so those are not going to conflict. The air-to-air weapon lock are also set to R3. Now I do use weapon selection to make sure that my air-to-air lock button and my drop bomb button does not conflict. And to switch to secondary weapons, I still have it on that circle button. Countermeasures are to the cross. What I really should have is separate binds for the fire, flares, and chaff. And I think I did have that. I don't know. I may not have just saved that from the last preset. IRST mode, I start to use the directional pad on the controller. Switching between radar and IRST, I have set to K on the keyboard. Change radar IRST mode is down. This is left. That's right. These are all pretty important. Select radar target to lock is L1. And to lock the radar on the target, I also have it set for the same button as my rockets. Again, making sure weapon selection is selected towards air-to-air missiles. Gunners are the same setting right here, and my view settings are exactly the same as well as the miscellaneous, the aiming, the trimming, and the manual engine controls. And there's no difference when it comes to my view controls in common or to the interface or voice messages. Now, I'll be honest with you guys, my gripper setup is almost the exact same as the Jets one. This one's just a little bit more updated. Last one I'll show you guys is the 109 setup. And the difference with the 109 setup is that while I still have the Airbrake set to R2, which again is this button on the back of the throttle, I also have that same button now binded to the manual engine controls setting for controlling the auto prop pitch. So when I hit the space bar on my keyboard, the 109s will still give you an option to have an auto mixture, auto prop pitch, and auto radiators. So because of that, whenever I get into any 109, I just hit the spacebar to activate manual engine controls because there's no penalty for doing so. Everything is actually still on auto until you hit a button that brings you into a specific section. So in this case, that button that I have for the air brakes activation is now the same button that I have to activate the auto prop pitch control or to toggle it to manual. And then the key here is that my prop pitch is set towards the rocker on the back of the T-Flight HOTUS. This is 100%, this is 0%. You can play with it in the middle, although I find absolutely no reason to do so. Now, if you're not aware, the 109 actually has a built-in air brake sort of into its engine, whether it's intentional or not. And it happens when you turn the prop pitch to 100%, it causes a ridiculous level of drag, because it turns the props almost perpendicular with the nose cone of the plane. If you're looking as the pilot, the prop is now almost 100% perpendicular with you. What this actually means is that there's less air resistance for it to go around, meaning that if you have your engine to anything more than 10%, you're actually going to over rev the engine and kill it instantly. So if you do what I'm about to say, make sure that you pull the throttle back to 0%. It is so key. So now, because the 109 doesn't actually have an air brake, I can hit this R2 button at no penalty to turn prop pitch on manual and then set the prop pitch to 100% while pulling this back. What this does is it causes a ridiculous level of drag since the propeller is now turned directly into the airflow, and with the throttle pulled all the way back, it causes a ridiculous level of drag, something comparable to an air brake. Now, I typically don't use this trick for a very long time during a fight, and therefore when I want it back, all I have to do is toggle auto prop pitch directly back on and then use the throttle exactly how I was doing it prior to the maneuver. There are a few aircraft that actually utilize this in War Thunder, and while all of the 109s have this trick, another aircraft that does is the Typhoon. So what's the difference between my Typhoon setup and my 109 setup? Well, it's very simple. The Typhoon that I like to fly, the one at 5.0, only has cannons. So now I just bind the large caliber guns, meaning the cannons, to the trigger on the back of the joystick instead of the one near my thumb. And then if any aircraft that only has cannons has this same ability with its propeller, I'll just use the Typhoon setup. I hope this was easy to follow. I hope this was easy to understand. I'm sorry this video is so past due, and I'm sorry content has been generally slow, but I promise you it will pick up. So like the video if you guys found this helpful. And if you're into War Thunder Sim and you're just getting into it, I promise you I've got lots of extra content for you. So make sure you're subscribed. Appreciate you all. Catch you in the next one.